This one's from when I was a kid. It's not something I talk about much, or even think about, really. Whenever I do, it gives me this uneasy feeling inside. Hard to describe. Maybe writing it down will help me get some kind of closure. But who knows? I went to a boarding school out in the suburbs. I started there in 8th grade and stayed through most of high school. I shared a room with a kid named Weston. We weren't close at first, just two random students thrown together, but over time we got used to each other. The room itself was simple, 2 beds, 2 desks, and a tiny shared closet. But after a few weeks, I started noticing some strange things about Weston. For starters, he gave me a list of items I wasn't allowed to bring into the room. Completely out of nowhere, he just handed me a folded piece of paper, like it was some official roommate agreement or something. As if that wasn't odd enough, the list itself was even stranger. It had a bunch of random, nonsensical things on it. I don't remember all of them, but apparently I wasn't allowed to bring frogs into the room. Like, seriously? I didn't even know where anyone would find a frog, let alone why they'd bring one inside. But the strangest thing on that list was salt. You don't just bring salt to a dorm room. And it's not like anyone was allowed to bring food anyway. So why did he care? What kind of problem could salt possibly cause? Salt allergies aren't even a thing, right? The way he insisted on it was what got me. You might think it was just his version of a joke, but this kid didn't do humor, not even by accident. He also had this unsettling habit of muttering to himself. Not occasionally either. He'd whisper under his breath, full-on conversations, especially at night after lights out. Sometimes I'd catch bits of what he was saying, like he was talking to someone. But there was never anyone else in the room. It startled me at first, especially the nights when he accidentally woke me up doing it. But eventually I got used to it. Or at least I told myself I did. He also had this little notebook. I didn't think much of it until I realized what was inside. He never let anyone see it, and that made me curious. One day, when he was out, I reached under his mattress and found it. Most of it was blank, but a few pages had writing. It only took 2 seconds to realize what I was looking at. A long list of names, most of them scribbled out. And the most unsettling part? They were names of kids from our school. My stomach dropped as I scanned the list. And there it was, my name, near the bottom, not crossed out. I had no idea what it meant, but it made my skin crawl. There were no notes, no explanations, just names. I put it back quickly, but the unease didn't fade. If it were just a harmless list, why hide it like that? Why guard it so carefully? After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I'd seen it. He started looking at me differently, staring more often, his eyes colder. I barely spent any time in our dorm anymore. I'd hang out in my friends' rooms, anything to avoid being alone with him. Then one night, something happened that confirmed every uneasy thought I'd had. I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was pitch black. At first I thought I was hearing him muttering again, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't that. Weston wasn't muttering. He was standing over my bed, just standing there, smiling. His hands were slightly raised, like he was about to do something, but had frozen mid-motion. I yelled his name, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stood there, grinning down at me. When I finally asked what he was doing, he said I'd been talking in my sleep. Like that somehow explained why he was hovering over me at 2 in the morning. I didn't say anything else. His smile didn't fade. He just quietly climbed back into his bed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I brought it up. Daylight made me feel safer, like maybe I could laugh it off. But Weston just looked confused, genuinely confused, not defensive, not irritated, just blank, like he thought I was the strange one. I couldn't tell if he was pretending or if he really didn't remember. And honestly, I didn't know which possibility was worse. After that, I wasn't just uneasy around Weston. I was uneasy in the room itself. It felt off, like the air remembered. Then about a week later, it happened again. But stranger, I came back to the room one night and there was a snake on my bed. A real live garden snake coiled up right where I slept. I shouted in surprise. Weston didn't even react. He just sat at his desk, staring with a blank face. When I asked what was going on, he calmly said, "It was just a harmless prank." I asked where he'd even gotten the snake, and he tilted his head, confused. "What do you mean?" he said. "They're everywhere." I froze. I'd never seen a single snake on campus, ever. But what really sent chills through me was what happened next. He opened a glass jar from his desk, and the snake slithered right in by itself, like it wanted to. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong with Weston. I didn't report it. I should have. But I was too scared, too young and too naive to imagine what might happen if I did. That's the thing you have to remember. I was just a kid, 13 years old, way too young to know how to handle something like that. The breaking point came a few nights later. It started with what I thought was a nightmare. I was in sleep paralysis, completely unable to move, and there was this dark mass swirling across the ceiling. It looked like a cross between a shadow and a cloud, pulsing, like it was alive or breathing. It kept shifting, moving, almost studying me, and then, slowly, it started descending toward my bed. That's when something reached out from it. A shape, or something like a shape. It scraped across my bed frame with this slow, metallic sound, and then it started reaching for me. But before it could touch me, it suddenly jerked back, like something had pushed it away or scared it off. And then it went completely out of control. It started spinning wildly around the room, fast, chaotic, knocking over books, tossing papers into the air, even rattling the closet doors. It felt furious, like something had disturbed it. Then, in one sharp motion, it darted toward the window and burst through it, vanishing into the darkness outside. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. My head was already turned toward the window, like I'd been facing it the whole time. And then I realized why that was so terrifying. The window was broken. Shards of glass were still sliding to the floor. Right then, in real time. My heart sank. The room looked exactly like it had in my dream. Every single detail, a perfect match. Even though I was sure I was awake, I couldn't move. My body refused to respond. Then I saw it. Deep, uneven markings scratched into my bed frame, right where that shape had been. That's when the paralysis finally faded. I could move again, but the fear didn't leave. My first thought was Weston. He had to know something about it. I stumbled to his bed. He was asleep, or at least he looked like it. He was even snoring. But I couldn't shake the doubt. I whispered his name, then called it louder. Nothing. The longer he stayed asleep, the more desperate I felt. I just wanted him to wake up, wanted some kind of explanation. Because if it wasn't him, Then what was it? That thought hit me like a wave. What if it hadn't been a dream at all? I started shaking. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to blame Weston for everything, just to make sense of it, just so I wouldn't feel so alone. But he didn't wake up. Eventually, I went back to my bed, curled up, and cried quietly. I didn't know what else to do. The broken window was real. The scratches were real. The mess all around the room, real. A few minutes later, Weston finally woke up. He looked genuinely shocked when he saw the room. For a second, I thought that meant we were finally on the same page, that maybe he'd admit something. But no, he turned on me instead, accused me of touching his things. We both started shouting, talking over each other, until the noise filled the room. Then he did something that froze me in place. He started making this low hissing sound, like he wasn't even himself. And then he began muttering in some language I didn't recognize, fast, emotional, almost panicked. It didn't sound normal. It didn't sound human. I thought he was about to lash out when the RA suddenly burst into the room. He must have heard the commotion. He separated us immediately and had me stay in a vacant dorm that night. When I woke up the next morning, I was freezing. At first I thought it was the air conditioning, but then I saw it. The window in that room was wide open. I was sure I'd closed it before I went to sleep. That was the final straw. I'd been trying to rationalize everything, to convince myself that what happened had some kind of logical explanation. But seeing that open window destroyed all of that. Later that morning, one of the RAs told me to grab my things from my old room. When I got there, Weston's side was completely empty. His stuff gone. No one told me where he went. The administration just said he was no longer my concern and gave me a new roommate. I never saw Weston again. Honestly, I don't remember much from the rest of my time at that school. It's like my mind just blocked it out. A final attempt to protect itself. To this day, I don't know what was wrong with Weston. I don't even want to know. But I've replayed that night 1,000 times, trying to find a reason. The window was broken from the inside. Anything that might have come from outside would have landed in the room. And I know it wasn't Weston. He'd been sleeping too deeply, and I woke up too quickly. If he'd done it, I would have seen him moving or getting back into bed. Something else happened that night, and it still terrifies me to think that my nightmare might not have been a nightmare at all. When I was little, my parents used to send me to my grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks every summer. The place sat on 40 acres of mostly woods. Honestly, more forest than farm. My cousin Francisco would visit on different weeks because our parents wanted to give our grandparents a break between visits. I always went the first 2 weeks of July. He always went the last 2 weeks of August. The house had 3 floors, but the top one was just an attic with a single finished room, the one that used to belong to my dad when he was my age. That's where I slept. The ceiling slanted on both sides, and there was one window that overlooked the backyard and the tree line beyond it. My grandparents went to bed early, usually before 9. My parents had told me it was polite to stay quiet after that, so I always stayed in my room once they said good night. I never fell asleep right away, though. I'd read under the covers with a flashlight or play my Game Boy. There wasn't much else to do there. The first summer passed without anything unusual, but the second one felt different. On one of my first nights back, I was reading in bed when I heard footsteps on the attic stairs. They were soft, like someone trying to move quietly. I froze and watched as the door handle slowly turned and the door creaked open about 6 inches. The moment I saw it move, I switched off my flashlight and pretended to be asleep. I honestly thought it was my grandma checking on me, and I didn't want to get caught staying up. But then, silence, no footsteps, no door closing, nothing. I forced myself to drift off, assuming I'd missed her leaving, or that she was still standing there, making sure I was asleep. The next morning, I told my grandpa what I'd heard. He chuckled and said the house was old, that it made noises, and that raccoons sometimes got in the walls. That explanation didn't make much sense to me. Raccoons don't turn doorknobs, but I didn't argue. 3 nights later, it happened again. I woke up, or maybe I thought I woke up because my bed was trembling slightly. Someone was standing at the foot of it. I could see a shadowed outline in the dark, but not a face. I didn't know if it was my grandma or grandpa. Either way, I was frozen. I shut my eyes tight and counted silently to 100. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. I told myself it had just been a dream, but it didn't feel like one. When I woke up the next morning, my closet door was wide open. I was certain I'd closed it before bed. That's when I started to wonder if maybe my grandma was checking on me while I slept. It sounds silly now, but at the time it was the only thing that made sense. I didn't want to bring it up again and upset her, so I kept quiet. Things like that kept happening. Soft footsteps, shifting shadows, faint creaks in the floorboards, little moments that made my stomach twist. When my mum came to pick me up 2 weeks later, I was relieved. I told her everything on the drive home. The noises, the footsteps, the figure, even my suspicion about Grandma. She just laughed, said it was impossible to get my grandma out of bed once she was asleep, told me I had an active imagination and that old houses were just creepy. She said Francisco never mentioned anything strange during his visits. That made me doubt myself. Maybe I had imagined it all. But the next summer when I went back, it all started again. The same sounds, the same feeling of being watched. I never saw a face, but deep down I was sure I knew who or what it was. After that, I started going to bed early, just so I wouldn't be awake for whatever it was. Years passed, and eventually my parents stopped sending me to the farm. I can't lie, I felt relieved. Then, when I was in college, both of my grandparents passed away, just a few weeks apart. The funeral was heavy, sad in every way. I had to reconnect with relatives I hadn't seen in years, including my cousin Francisco. We were never that close, but since we were about the same age, I thought bringing up the farm might help start a conversation. So I asked him about it. I told him everything. The footsteps, the door that would move, the open closet, even my theory that maybe it was Grandma checking on me. When I was little, my parents used to send me to my grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks every summer. The house sat on 40 acres, mostly covered in trees. Honestly, it was more forest than farm. My cousin Francisco would visit during different weeks, since our parents wanted to give our grandparents a little break between visits. I always went the first 2 weeks of July, and he always went the last 2 weeks of August. The house had 3 floors, though the top one was just an attic, with one small finished room that used to belong to my dad when he was my age. That's where I slept. The ceiling slanted on both sides, and there was one small window overlooking the backyard and the trees beyond. My grandparents went to bed early, usually before 9. My parents had told me it was polite to stay quiet after they did, so I always stayed in my room once they said goodnight. I rarely fell asleep right away. I'd stay up reading under the covers or playing my Game Boy. There wasn't much else to do there. The first summer went by perfectly fine, but the second one felt different. One of the first nights I was reading in bed when I heard footsteps coming up the attic stairs. They were soft, careful, like someone trying not to make noise. Then the doorknob turned slightly, and the door creaked open a few inches. As soon as I saw it move, I shut off my flashlight and pretended to be asleep. I figured it was my grandma checking on me, and I didn't want to get caught staying up late. But then, silence. No footsteps going back down, no sound of the door closing. I stayed still, waiting. Eventually, I must have drifted off. The next morning, I told my grandpa about it. He just laughed and said the house was old, that it made sounds, and maybe raccoons or the wind were the cause. That didn't really explain the doorknob turning, but I didn't question it further. A few nights later, something similar happened. I woke up and thought I saw someone standing near the end of my bed. Just a faint shape in the dark. I couldn't tell who it was. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, my closet door was open. I knew I had closed it before bed. That's when I started wondering if maybe my grandma was checking on me while I slept, quietly, so she wouldn't wake me up. After that, little things kept happening. Gentle footsteps, the soft creak of the floor, or the faint feeling that someone was nearby. Nothing harmful, just unusual. When my mom came to pick me up 2 weeks later, I told her everything. She laughed and said it was impossible to wake Grandma once she was asleep, that I probably had a very active imagination,